Hey everybody, it is Mike Schumann and Seth Tao here for a long-awaited next edition of the East 17th Street podcast. After a pretty healthy summer hiatus, we are back now that fall camp is underway in Bloomington for football, and we're gonna kick off a series here today as we take a look at one opponent and one position for the 2025 IU football season. And to immediately go against that theme, I'll say we're going to cover three opponents today because we're going to cover the entire non-conference schedule. And part of the reason for doing that is kind of a theme, a viral theme that has emerged here over the last couple of weeks and really throughout the summer, kind of starting when it was announced that Indiana canceled a 2027 and 28 series against Virginia, thereby eliminating pretty much all of their high major or power four non-conference games for the foreseeable future. I think they still might have one out there against Notre Dame way out, 5 years from now or so. But pretty much the philosophy going forward from Curt Cignetti is that they are going to play three non-conference games against non-power four opponents, probably an FCS school in there pretty much every year, as is allowed. They can do one of those. And he went viral at his appearance at Big Ten Media Day a couple weeks ago, basically calling this approach the SEC philosophy of scheduling. And Seth, I guess just starting with that point, it did go viral when he said that. Obviously, the SEC media did not appreciate it. But it does seem to me like it's a valid point. It's one of those things where, there's you got to be of two minds. Like, is it the optimal thing to do from a fan perspective, from a college football perspective? Probably not. Is it the optimal thing to do if you're trying to help make sure Indiana is not a one and done from a college football playoff standpoint? I think it absolutely is the right approach. What was your reaction when Cignetti made that appearance and that comment went viral a few weeks ago?
I mean, look, Cignetti being Cignetti, he's going to use. He's not afraid to use some colorful terms and language to get his point across at all times. So nothing in that sense surprised me. You bring up a good point, though. That I mean, I feel like if you he would maybe never publicly admit it, but if you pressed Curt Cignetti, if you pressed Scott Dolson, and in their heart of hearts, I'm sure they'd know like this philosophy is not good for the average college football fan. It's not good for the health of the sport. But to a certain extent, it's not their job to look out for that. Their job is to look out for Indiana. Their job isn't to look out for the good of the sport. And that's a whole separate conversation you can launch yourself into as to the overarching powers over the sport and who, how the sport should be structured. And, there's definitely a good point to be made that, maybe there needs to be a college football commissioner that's looking out for the good of the sport and, making things like that happen. But for Cignetti, I mean, there's no, Cignetti's got to worry about Indiana and Indiana only. And I mean, my reaction to at least the, SEC stuff aside, of course, he's going to, rustle some feathers over with the SEC. But as far as the actual scheduling philosophy, I mean, it's not incorrect that, I think a series against Virginia whether it's Indiana or even a school with lesser aspiration, you could take a school like Maryland projected to finish closer to the bottom of the Big Ten this year, like a home and maybe not the best example because they used to be rivals, but like home and home with Virginia for Maryland doesn't really, what good does that do them, compared to playing, a smaller, Sunbelt team that you'd feel a lot better with your chances against. For Indiana, I think the games against like the Virginias of the world don't do you any good. I think you need to probably end up at one of the two polar extremes, whether it's, basically getting 3 automatic wins or however many automatic wins, so to speak. Nothing's ever automatic in sports, but basically you either automatic wins or you play against the really top tier, high caliber teams that, if you lose those games, those aren't going to be seen as bad losses. But if you win those games, those are really big resume boosts, that could really put you over the line, give you a little cushion in conference play, and really help you get into the college football playoff. The Notre Dames of the world, the
Right.
Alabamas of the world, like some of those SEC teams, like if you're getting a non-conference game against them, that's another story. But playing somebody like Virginia, compared to just scheduling, Eastern Michigan, Northern Illinois, and Indiana State, there's no advantage for Indiana, and the only real disadvantage is going to be, maybe losing a few points in the court of public opinion, which, I mean, Kurt Signetti has not really shown to care much about.
Right. I think I went back and added it up. There were 19 of the 34 teams across the Big Ten and SEC that are following the playing three non-power four opponents. So Indiana is actually in the majority, and the majority of those teams are SEC. So Signetti's not wrong to call it the SEC philosophy, and it all stems from the fact that the SEC plays 8 conference games and the Big Ten plays 9. And I think he was pretty. I mean, to that point about what's best for college football, like he was pretty open to a level playing field. Like I think his comments were he wants everybody to play the same amount of conference games. He wants there to be playing games on that championship weekend in December. So I think what they would like to do is have a level playing field and to play better games, more attractive games to fans and for the betterment of the sport. But I can't take issue with what they're doing right now. I mean, with the downside that comes with it, though, I mean, if I don't know how accurate numbers are that get reported on social media about like how many tickets remain from some of these early games, but if they're right, I mean, they certainly haven't announced sellouts for any of their non-conference games so far, and I think they're going to struggle. Yeah, as long as unless last season becomes the norm and people are just so ate up by IU football that even a game against Kennesaw State gets them excited. I know, Ohio State probably sells out their non-power four games for 100,000 fans, so it can be done. But right now, fans are not, the demanding tickets in big numbers to this point. The other thing I wanted to say is like, even though it may not be exciting for fans now, I mean, Indiana had the same scheduling philosophy last year, or at least that's the way it ended up last year. Um, and if you remember talking to the fans, if fans remember how they felt in December when the bracket came out and Indiana played Notre Dame and all the anticipation and build up for that game, nobody was thinking anything about the 3 non-conference games and kind of what it took to get there. Like, I think that fans will take that trade-off every day of the week, maybe 3 less attractive home games in September for the opportunity to legitimately say you are playing for a national championship, even if it's, you got to win 3-4 games to get there. Still, I think that is a trade-off I think fans will take every time.
Yeah, and even going back, I mean, this scheduling philosophy preceded Kurt Signetti to begin with. I mean, you'll
Yeah.
recall, the last year of Tom Allen's tenure is when they canceled that Louisville game, and I mean, even before last season with with Signetti and just the way obviously they got to the playoff and now expectations are elevated and all that. Even with what IU football used to be, like it's that scheduling philosophy still made the most sense to have 3 light non-conference games because in terms of what IU football used to be, I mean, the goal in most seasons would be get to a bowl game, become bowl eligible, and you usually had the gauntlet of the Big Ten East where you were playing Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State every year. So you needed those 3 basic, whether they were guaranteed wins or not. You wanted those 3 pretty good opportunities at wins to then get to then put yourself where you only need 3 Big Ten wins to get to a bowl game. So this isn't even something that's new with Signetti specifically. I mean, this is just how Indiana's been operating, and it's made sense both with what IU used to be and what IU is now.
Yeah, and here's the other thing I'll say. Not everybody will agree with this, but in my opinion, that kind of the weight of the college football world is a little bit against Indiana right now. I mean, I don't think you could have another 11-1 Big Ten team. Hey, Ollie, how we doing, bud? Ollie's making an appearance for those watching on YouTube. But I don't think you could have another 11-1 Big Ten team that could have so many people trying to suggest that team was not worthy to be in the CFP. And I think going into this season, people are already looking for a reason to keep Indiana out, in my opinion. So it's not the same luxury that a brand team like Ohio State plays Texas in the opener and knows even if that doesn't go well, that they have a good chance to play their way into it. Where I feel like there's a lot of people that are just looking for the reason to keep Indiana out.
Yeah, and whether it's I mean, look, it's not some, what some people might think otherwise. It is not like a huge conspiracy against Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
If Illinois last season had the same season that Indiana did, and Illinois was in the same position, I think the SEC people would be saying the exact same thing.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
think
I
that this
agree.
is Indiana specific. And if people are still talking about Indiana right now just because. And look, Kurt Signetti, whether Kurt Signetti keeps Indiana, talked about with just
Right.
everything he says, and just kind of the way that he's not willing to take the little comments and blows from down south. If Indiana, loses a few games and falls out of the playoff picture, and it is Illinois or it is, say Michigan State surprises people and winds up on the cusp, like it would be the same type of thing. Like it would just, it's the haves and the have-nots, and Indiana got to that point last season where they tasted what it's like to be among the haves, but they're not going to be afforded that luxury and that status until they kind of can put themselves there consistently year after year. And that doesn't always mean you got to make the playoff every year, but
Right.
Indiana just had that was the Cinderella season, the magical best season in program history. People are going to be expecting them to regress a little bit. And, if Indiana can sustain, a similar level of play, even if it's not the same record and outcome, if they can sustain a similar level of play for the next 2, 3, 4 years, then the conversation may change.
Yep. But for now, the conversation is three non-power four opponents, and I do want to get into them briefly. We're not going to spend a lot of time on them because they're quite frankly they're not super exciting opponents. Indiana opens with Old Dominion on August 30th, then hosts Kennesaw State, then Indiana State. I think it's fair to say, would you agree, Old Dominion is the most formidable of the three?
I'd agree. I mean, Kennesaw State could be, there's the intrigue at least of Dexter Williams returning to
Right.
Bloomington. That's going to be, the storyline with that game. But I mean, Old Dominion is the most intriguing and probably the highest quality of the three teams that Indiana is
Right.
going to play. They still should not have any issue with that game. I mean, I think already, there's lines after these games already, and I think Indiana's. I think it's like they're like a 23 or 24 point favorite, which honestly felt even light to me.
Yeah,
But
very light.
but I mean, Old Dominion last season was 5-7, right on the cusp of bowl eligibility. They haven't finished with a winning record since 2016, but if I recall, I think they've got a decent number of pieces back this year. They run a spread offense. Maybe that's going to be while you would be concerned if Indiana is getting beaten by a spread offense, that might be a good early test, just
Right.
to see how they handle it. Maybe a couple plays here and there, a couple, they give up a drive and it becomes a learning lesson sort of thing, or if nothing else, just, it forces them to prep for that sort of look early in the season if they end up having to see it again. So, there's at least that level of intrigue with that.
Yeah, and I know Signetti's already kind of shared some talking points that he's sharing with the team on Old Dominion. One thing he said that I wasn't aware of, and I had to go back and look at it, is they went to South Carolina last year and I lost by single digits, and I think actually legitimately threatened them last year. That sometimes these early season games, especially the first game, can be weird. I mean, Indiana's game against FIU last year was a little weird. I mean, they ended up winning by a comfortable margin, but Rourke didn't play particularly well that game, and there were some moments. I think FIU, scored on the last drive of the first half, if I remember right, and
Hmm.
Indiana in that game certainly didn't look like the Indiana team we came to know as the season evolved. So, I mean, there's some potential that there can be some intrigue in that game. Certainly not expecting it, but it does seem to me, based on your write up, and people can go to the football schedule at the Daily Hoosier, and I've got linked on that schedule all of Seth's previews for all 12 opponents. He did a really good job with those. Week 2, Kennesaw State, you mentioned it. Probably the headline story there is Dexter Williams coming back to Bloomington. Uh, I'm happy for the guy. He had a really interesting IU career, kind of came in unheralded as a recruit, ended up starting out of nowhere. And I guess it was 22. Had
Hmm.
a led IU to a win at Michigan State, a really surprising win. And I was it the very next week he started at Purdue and had them off to a good start before he completely destroyed his
Yep.
knee. Yeah,
Yep.
and that was the last that we saw of him, because it cost him his entire 2023 season. Then he transferred out when Signetti came in, and lo and behold, he's coming back with Kennesaw State in week 2.
Yeah, I mean, that 2022 run was very it was interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
you may recall too, he played against Ohio State in
Yes.
Columbus that year too, and I mean, Indiana got demolished in that game, and it's not even fair to say that Dexter Williams played well in that game, but there were a few moments where
Right.
he made some plays and looked a little frisky and seemed like maybe they got something here. And that Michigan State game is, if you're going, not that people are going to want to reminisce too much on various dark years of Indiana football where they were losing a lot more games than they were winning, but as far as those tough times, through the last couple decades go, that's got to be one of the more memorable wins from years like that.
Yes. Yeah, I will confess, like, I was, even though it's my job to do so, I was barely paying attention at that point, because I believe they had not won a Big Ten game, or maybe that ended up being the second one that they won, and basketball season was starting, and I was just barely paying attention because you were doing a good job covering it, and then all of a sudden they come back in that game, and Williams is running all over the field, and definitely caught my eye. And that Purdue game, he actually got off to a really good start. I think he scored, or I forget what he did, but then he got hurt. His real weapon was his legs, and
Oh
he
yeah.
made just enough good throws to be a dual threat.
He
But
was very, very raw as a passer.
yeah,
Like if he was health, even before the injury, like we were all saying, you couldn't even lock him in as the starting quarterback for 23, before the injury, just because
right,
he was so, they were playing him pretty much out of necessity,
right,
at that point, because you had, true freshman Brendan Sorsby looked really rough the
right,
couple series he had been put out there. Williams at least was able to get something going. But I mean, everyone was saying at that point, like, he's got to improve as a passer to be able to really
right.
turn into anything. So, but I mean, the running ability was very real. I mean,
Yeah.
especially I mean, it's easy to forget, with the way Indiana's offensive line has transformed itself the last couple of years, but behind a really brutal
Yes.
offensive line, a lot of it was out of necessity, just having to get out of the pocket to protect himself. But I mean, that scramble ability, that running ability was very real.
Now, some of it might have been that, like, he hadn't played a lot that year, so he wasn't heavily scouted. So he's catching some people off guard. I mean, maybe it would have eventually caught up with him, but I guess we'll see where he's at in week 2. He doesn't, based on what we know about him historically, he doesn't pose a what I would perceive to be a major threat to Indiana. Um, I would think it would take a very elite, accurate passer to do so, because I don't think his athleticism is going to pop enough to pose a threat to IU. I can't think of any other intriguing storylines in that game. When I've looked at Kennesaw State on like the FBS or the ESPN rankings, their computer rankings, they're like one of the bottom 10 teams throughout all of FBS. So I don't see this as being a close game whatsoever. And we'll do like game by game predictions as we get into the final week
Yeah.
before kickoff. But the only other thing, when I think Kennesaw State, I think President Pam Whitten, she seems to like IU plays Kennesaw State in everything now, and I think she was the president at Kennesaw State, so I think she's pulling some strings there to see her old school.
I mean, there's been a couple, maybe closer than people would have liked basketball games against Kennesaw
Yeah,
State the last few years. So I'm sure people are
Kennesaw
going to hope
State and everybody else.
that. Well, yes, that's true, but I mean, even people are going to hope that that's not the case. I mean,
Right,
Kennesaw State, the football team. I mean, this is just their second year
right,
at the FBS. They moved up last year, so like it's not entirely their fault.
right,
They can obviously, Kurt Signetti and JMU were able to navigate that much better, but I think they were in a better position in
right.
FCS, before they made the transition. And, so that you can only expect so much out of a team like that. If Dexter Williams is, running it around like he used to, it's kind of similar to, I mean, Old Dominion has like a running quarterback as well. I mean, their returning quarterback rushed for, I have this in front of me. He put up 647 rushing yards on 114 carries with 11 rushing touchdowns last year. So, if Williams is running the ball the way that Indiana fans saw him do it a few years ago, I mean, yeah, Indiana should have no problem against this team. But it's another thing that, maybe it could be a good test for Indiana to
Right.
maybe see a quarterback like that can really, really move that, the way, I mean, not to compare Dexter Williams to anyone of that caliber, but to see, to a quarterback that can run similarly to like Lamar Jackson or, somebody
Just had to get that in, didn't you?
oh, of course, that. Yeah, or Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels or somebody like that. Like, if you're not that if Dexter Williams is running at least with that sort of flair, I guess is the right way to put it. If he's running with that sort of flair, it's at least a decent test, to see
Right.
how Indiana handles it.
The one thing that does come to mind just popped in my head. I was remembering the Northwestern game last year. They had a decent running quarterback, and when Jalen Walker went out of that game, they kind of struggled for a while to kind of keep him in check. And obviously, Walker's gone. Elijah Hardy's inexperienced in that role, so it could be a good, like, as you said, good test to see where they're at, kind of at that level of the defense in terms of keeping a running quarterback in check. Don't want to spend a lot of time on Indiana State. I think you alluded to this in your preview. The one thing that really jumps out about this game is that it is on a Friday night within the state of Indiana. You got Indiana versus Indiana State on a Friday night when high school football is going on. Kind of just seems unfortunate. Obviously, the schools don't set the schedule. They don't set the days or kick times. That's all set by the television guys. But it's unfortunate. I guess it's working well for BTN to do these Friday night games from a rating standpoint because they seem to keep doing it. But it's suboptimal. Let's just put it that way.
I mean, the bigger issue with this one, it's not only that it's a Friday night and competing with, high school football in general, but the specific Friday night that this game is on, Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South, I think it's Terre Haute North and Terre Haute South, where Indiana State is, they're
Right.
playing each other, and Bloomington North and Bloomington South are playing each other. So
That's
it's
right.
not
You did
just
say that.
right. So it's not just a normal high school football Friday. It's like you're putting those two college teams up against each other for what might be like one of the bigger high school nights of the whole season. The in-town rivalry, and it's like that's
Right.
just really unfortunate.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, that's kind of a great point, like a marquee night that, everybody in Bloomington and Terre Haute wants to go to those games. And now they kind of got that tension of deciding between those games and the IU Indiana State game. Like I said, the colleges don't decide it, but you would like to see maybe a little bit more foresight and planning for situations like that to go into it. I don't know if the fact that it's an FCS game was Western Illinois last year, was that Friday night as well? It
Yeah.
seems like it was. So maybe that suggests the ratings aren't so hot that they're they're throwing the FCS games in that slot. I'm not sure. But it is what it is. I mean, I don't think this game will be as ugly as Western Illinois last year, just because I don't think it's possible for a team to
That's
be as
not
bad
saying
as
a lot.
right. I mean, Western Illinois might not have been able to beat Bloomington South if I if I really think about it. Hopefully their fortunes have improved, but of the three games, I think Indiana State's going to present the least challenge of anyone.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was what 77-3 last year, something like
Yeah,
that. Do not
yeah,
expect that. That is not that cannot be an expectation. They will win very comfortably, and I'm sure the score is going to look funny by the end of the game, and I'm sure you're going to see a lot of second and third stringers throughout the second half, and that's really all you can say. I mean, it's just yeah, there's no. I'm not going to say there's no possible way, but it would shock me if they came even anywhere close to what they did last year against Western Illinois.
yeah, for sure. I mean, the only other storyline I can think of that game is it's once again the return of Kurt Mallory, son of Bill Mallory, as head coach for Indiana State. So that's always kind of a nice moment for that family to kind of have time back in Bloomington. But again, I mean, I here's what I think: if Indiana didn't start 3-0, it would shock the world. It would certainly make the SEC folks pretty happy. Kurt Signetti would be the butt of everybody's jokes, but I don't think there's any question that they will start 3-0. I mean, I think the only question is, are any of those games interesting at all? Like I would say if any of them are within 40 points, I would be surprised.
If any of the games are interesting, and obviously how the guys all look in those games, do they get through
Right.
these games healthy? That's a big one too.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're going to transition to quarterbacks, and I think it's a kind of a good segue. Is like everybody knows Fernando Mendoza is going to be the starter for this team, but to the extent we see other quarterbacks this year, it's going to be in those first three games primarily. And uh, I think last year that's when we saw Alberto Mendoza against Western Illinois. Saw a little bit of everybody, I think, in those games. So, I wanted to keep this to a half hour. It looks like I'm not doing a great job at that, but do want to talk about the quarterbacks. For Fernando, we've watched him in the spring. We've watched him a few times here at fall camp. Give me your kind of overall assessment. To me, I'm interested in your take on this too. Like, I can't think of a quarterback who's had more preseason hype at Indiana. Maybe senior year Nate Sutfeld, but I'm not even sure that was the case. Like, I've seen Fernando mentioned as like a potential number one overall draft pick. Certainly, a lot of first round mentions. Like, can you think of anybody since you've been around Indiana that's generated that hype? I think the easy answer is no, but secondarily, based on what you're seeing, like, do you see somebody that's worthy of that kind of conversation?
Well, yeah. To answer the first part, no, I have not seen anybody get that level of hype, and I mean, kind of for good reason for the most part, because
Yeah,
Indiana hasn't had a first round draft pick in the NFL draft since the 1990s. So
right,
it's one of the longest droughts in the country in FBS. So it's kind of for good reason that you don't see guys getting that level of hype around Indiana, but. Um, does he meet the hype? I feel like it's not fair. It's almost unfair for me to, and I don't want to straddle and not address the question, but it's difficult to say he's met the hype or he hasn't met the hype
right,
when I've stood in there for 30 minutes worth of three practices.
right.
And obviously, there's more practice that we don't see. There's all the film work and everything, and there's all the extra work. And I mean, look, from what we've seen in spring and the few practices this fall, I mean, he's got the talent to be a really good quarterback for Indiana. He's I wouldn't say he's a mobile quarterback, but like compared to Curtis Rourke playing through a torn ACL, I mean, he will be able to get out of the pocket and move a little bit and you know maybe make a run here or there. But I
Right.
mean, he's got a really good arm. He's accurate from what we've seen. he's a very personable guy that, everybody seems to love and rally
Right.
around as far as, the leadership aspect that you want out of that position. So, I mean, there's nothing I can say that we've seen so far that gives me pause with Fernando Mendoza. It's just that there's not much that I can really definitively say until we see him. And it's going to be the same for pretty much every position. But,
Right.
you know, he's got the potential to live up to the hype. I think, like I said, I don't think there's anything that gives me pause or concern, but I think we all just need to see how, I mean, the offense as a whole, how it looks, against an actual opponent, and how Fernando looks against an actual opponent. And like you said earlier, I mean, in week 1 last year against FIU, Curtis Rourke didn't look all that amazing and,
Right.
got better and better from there. So even if Fernando doesn't look like a number 1 NFL draft pick in week 1 against Old Dominion, that doesn't necessarily mean bust, not gonna live up to the hype. But, you're starting to get closer to that point, and it's just certainly, to me, too early to say, anything definitively when we've only seen little snippets here and there.
Yeah, and I think you answered what I was really asking is like, does anything give you pause about Fernando? I can't point to anything. I feel like you almost have to get into the weird stuff. Like last year at Cal, he was one of the most pressured and sacked quarterbacks throughout all of FBS. And like, maybe like some guys are almost better because they don't stand back in the pocket and think. They almost have to operate instinctively. And like when I say weird, I mean weird. Like will he, because he has more time, will he almost like develop a case of the yips or something where he's just like not used to that kind of thing? Almost, I would think even if that was a legitimate concern, he'd work that out in the first 3 weeks. Because
Right.
I what I remember about last year, one of the things that really stood out, because I've just never seen this with Indiana, is like Curtis Rourke until that Michigan game, all the games before, he would just stand back there and just go through his reads. And like there was almost rarely a case, maybe a little bit against Nebraska, but almost rarely a case where he was really feeling any pressure at all. And I think, if you believe Signetti, and I have no reason to not believe him, the offensive line's going to be better this year. So I think Fernando is just going to be experiencing a completely different type of situation with an improved offensive line, to where, I'm like talking myself or kind of thinking out loud. I don't even really believe it, but that's the only thing I can think of where I want to see how he's going to handle it. But he's
Right.
like
But even that is, not based on anything that we've seen so far,
right,
because we don't see, we're not seeing Fernando out there go, facing a live pass rush, and we are not really going to see that until week 1.
right,
So, we see him out there taking snaps and handing the ball off and throwing without really any pressure. And, maybe at most we see simulated pressure or something like that, but that's just not even close to the same as what
right.
he's going to face, even against an Old Dominion where Indiana should easily handle that game. It's just, at that point, we're just kind of debating, based on, not that the numbers don't lie, but it's just a completely different context. And, they only tell part of the story here. So, to me, it's there's nothing to answer the initial question. No, there's nothing that I've seen from Mendoza that gives me pause, but we have to acknowledge that what we've seen is maybe like 15% of the picture. Like there's
Yeah.
still a lot that we haven't seen that's going to really determine what he is as a quarterback for Indiana.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that hype that he's getting right now is just projection rather than, anything concrete. Like people saw how Signetti and Rourke work together. They know Signetti and Mike Shanahan's track record with quarterbacks. It's very good. And then you look at, who Fernando Mendoza is, a guy already with Power 4 experience. It's easy to kind of make those leaps, but we're not going to know for sure. Like you said, until we get, really into Big Ten play. I don't think we'll know anything too clearly. The one question everybody does have is who's going to back him up. I guess I can't think of the last time Indiana's gotten through a season without needing to go to the backup at some point. I think maybe Sudfeld's senior year. I'd have to go back and check on that. But the point being, it's rare to get through a season, at least for Indiana to get through a season without at some point going to the backup. Everybody knows Indiana had to do it last year with Taven Jackson. Who was a pretty competent backup, had starting experience, had a lot of experience overall, and I think whoever is the number 2 for Indiana this year is not going to have that, at least at the FBS level. But I think we all think, and we're not revealing anything from fall camp here because Signetti's been pretty open about it. We all think Alberto Mendoza is going to be the number 2 quarterback, and he has little to no college football experience other than some snaps in the early conference games last year as a true freshman, coming back as a redshirt freshman this year. And so if he truly is the number 2, and we think he will be, what does that bode for Indiana if they do have to turn to him?
Well, first off, to answer to bring up what you were talking about at first, you weren't far off with Sudfeld. I think it was the Richard Lego couple years. I think
Okay.
I think they
Did
got
he
through
make
those
it
couple
through?
years.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
pulled up his game log. He played 13 and then he played 12. I
Okay.
think
He was
I
a
think
big dude. He could take the
yeah,
hits.
yeah. So I think those were the answers to that question.
Okay.
But as far as Alberto, I mean, you hate to just keep pleading the fifth or anything, but he looks the part. Looks capable. He's got a good arm. I mean, he's a few inches shorter than Fernando, but other than that, I mean, they could be dead ringers for each other. I mean, they
Right.
look very alike in terms of just looking alike as brothers, but they have similar throwing motions too. I feel like they look very alike, and he's definitely got the potential in there to be a good college quarterback at some point. But we've seen, for all little that we've seen of Fernando, we at least have some, season, a season or two worth of, games started at Cal for Fernando to go off of. I mean, Alberto, he played against Western Illinois last year, but he barely even played in that game. I mean, he was the 4th quarterback in that game because Curtis Work started, and then they put in Taven, and then they put in Tyler Cherry, and then they put in Alberto. And
Right.
Alberto Mendoza only played maybe a couple 1 or 2 series at the end of the game when it was already like 70 to 3 or whatever it was, and he was I'm thinking probably more so just asked to hand the ball off and run the clock out than do anything indicative of quarterback. So all that's to say, I don't know. Like he like I said, he's got the build, he's got the talent in theory to be a good quarterback, but so much of playing quarterback, particularly at quarterback, is between the ears.
Right.
And he's a redshirt freshman that's played a few snaps at the college level, and there's no, even if, and yes, he has a brother that's been out there and he can lean on particularly closely for advice and everything, but we won't know how ready Alberto is to potentially step in until he has to do it, and that's something Indiana is going to hope doesn't have to happen. So
Right.
it's kind of an interesting balance there, but in theory, there's probably worse. There are worse backup quarterback situations, I'm sure, somewhere in the Big Ten. I don't think Indiana's got the worst backup quarterback situation in the Big Ten, but the
Right.
depth is definitely not great because you've got, an unproven redshirt freshman as your number 2. And this is also, partially because of Tyler Cherry's injury out for the
Right.
season with, I don't remember what his injury was, but, an
It was a
injury that
knee
was, I think it did happen in practice like last season. I think it
in the
was.
lead up
And
in the lead up to the Notre Dame game. Yeah.
yeah, right. So that's part of this. The depth would feel a little better if it wasn't for that. But behind Alberto, you have Grant Wilson, who's a 5th or 6th year senior Old Dominion. I think he's an Old Dominion transfer, actually, I think.
Yes, yes.
But he's right.
Indiana will have
He's
the full scouting report on Old Dominion in week
right,
one.
right. I mean, his numbers at Old Dominion were not anything spectacular and anything that suggests he'd be a capable Big Ten quarterback. Let's put
Right.
it that way. Maybe he's, at Indiana a little more so to, begin his post-playing career potentially.
Right.
And then you have a true freshman in Jacob Bell, who, I mean, for whatever concerns you might have about Alberto being unproven or unready, I mean, at least Alberto, spent a year, in a full year in a college conditioning program. I mean, Jacob Bell is, a true freshman, and yeah, so there you go. As far as the depth, I mean, let's put it that way. It's Indiana should be giving Alberto every opportunity to secure that number 2 job, and it would be very concerning if he doesn't secure the number 2 job. But as far as is he ready to step in and be the guy if something happens to Fernando, I think a lot of people would be holding their breath until he went out there and showed something.
Yeah, and I think, well, last year I felt like Cignetti kept working games later than I would have thought he would have, given time, score situations. But I'll be shocked in these early games if we don't see a lot of Alberto, because last year he knew Taven was experienced. He knows he's got to get Alberto some reps for that just in case moment. At least I would think so.
Yeah, I mean, but there's also the give and take of that, and clearly, I mean, the part of the reason why they were able to get into the college football playoff was not just based on the teams they beat, because while it wasn't as bad as while the strength of the schedule may not have been as bad as everybody was making it out to be, it had a lot to do with the dominant wins they had,
Yep.
where they were, running up the score on people for that, whether it was actually, bad sportsmanship or not. Like it was, they were hanging a lot of points on teams and looking really, really dominant. So that's part of it too. That,
Yeah, it's a good
I
point.
mean, he left work in games for, some of these blowout wins a lot longer than I might have, but some of that may have been intentional to try to, because maybe he knew that he needed to get these lopsided wins to kind of make his team look better.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Like I don't know exactly how it'll play out. Alberto is in the same situation as Fernando when Fernando kind of had his breakout redshirt freshman year. So there's at least some thought there. It's funny. You took a good picture of them throwing right next to each other. They do look a lot alike. Alberto unfortunately lost the height lottery with his genetics in the family somehow. He's a legit 3 inches shorter than his brother, but a lot of everything else about them, both physically and mechanically looks very similar. So he could be ready. I think we'll at least get a look at him in some of those early games. You mentioned Grant Wilson. I guess he's third string right now, Old Dominion guy. Obviously the staff's familiar with him from James Madison because they played against him. And he had a really good game against James Madison a couple of years ago. It's against Cignetti and crew. So, I guess he'll be there if duty calls. And you mentioned Tyler Cherry. If people don't know, he was a 4-star, same class as Alberto. Really big win at the time, or so it seemed. But he's going to miss this entire year. I don't even think he's technically on the roster.
He's
I think
not.
he's like taking like a GA type year. Um, a situation I hadn't seen before in terms of how they're handling it. But he's expected to be back next year, and we'll see where that goes. And then you mentioned Jacob Bell as the true freshman. So, that's where they are. Like you said, everybody's hope is you don't have to find out any of these things over the course of the season, but it's a slog, and you just never know when that thing's going to pop up at some point.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning also that I feel like if Curt Cignetti and his staff were uncomfortable with where Alberto was at in his development, I mean, they saw him, all last year and
Right.
And I guess Chandler Whitmer came in as quarterback coach, so only worked with him this spring. But if they were uncomfortable with where Alberto was at and as far as his development and his potential to be the number 2 quarterback, you'd think that they would have tried to bring somebody in the portal after spring ball. And that can
Yeah.
be easier said than done. There's only,
Right.
especially a quarterback, there's only so many options out there, and a lot of them get snatched up pretty quickly. And, there's not going to be that many options that are going to be looking to be a number 2.
Right.
But, the point stands. Like, if they were uncomfortable with the thought of Alberto going in, I would imagine they would have brought somebody else in.
Right. No, I agree. I think we can wrap it up there. Like I said, I want to do like one opponent, one position. We'll actually do one opponent
You're misleading the
prospectively.
people.
I know. Bad start on the series here, but we'll do Illinois, highly anticipated week 4 game that has sold out, and running backs maybe as soon as tomorrow. We got to figure out our schedules with fall camp, and I'm headed off to Puerto Rico on Wednesday. The series will probably take a pause when I go down there, but we'll in any event keep this rolling over the next couple of weeks. So we'll wrap it up there. It was good to get back on the podcast, and I guess we're 26 days away as we record here on August 4th from the start of the season. So we will look forward to catching up with the fan base a lot more from here on out. He is Seth Tao. I am Mike Schumann for the Daily Hoosier and East 17th Street. We will catch you all later.